Nityanandam, and welcome back everybody to another Vakyartha Sadhas session. Today we have our largest group here thus far. We've been going with 3 or 4 individuals, and today we are welcoming Sri Nitya Paramestiananda and James Braun as well, 2 fellow disciples of our guru, Bhagavan Sri Nityananda Paramashiva. And today we are talking again Vakyartha Sadhas. If you have been joining in these evening sessions, they've been quite profound. I know for myself, I've had a lot of interesting clicks, interesting experiences from these discussions. And if you're new here, Swamiji, our guru, is really encouraging us to internalize, taking 10 minutes only every evening to meditate on and contemplate and discuss building more powerful cognitions based off of his satsang. So if you're here, all we're asking really is take 10 minutes to participate, sit in and get into a deep space of listening, because that's really what Vakyartha Sadhas is all about. It's more of experiential sharing and expressing our understandings of the spiritual topics that is at hand for each evening. So this isn't just a conversation amongst individuals. This is more of experiential sharing. If we don't need or we don't have something to say, then we don't need to be talking. So sometimes there's going to be a little bit of dead air, and there's nothing wrong with that. Vakyartha Sadhas, again, it should bring a deep space of listening within us rather than trying to remember what we wanted to speak on or remember something that we wanted to say. It should really just kind of flower from within us. So if you are here, we would love it if you would join in and participate and leave your comments as well if you have something that comes up. I'm not saying that I'll pull up the comments and we'll discuss the same thing, but it could help you as well when you're going through this internalizing process. And so with that, we'll get started, and we will, I would like to welcome Paramestia to lead us in our evening prayer, starting with the Sadguru Vandanam.
Yeah, Nityanandam, guys. So yeah, let's start with the Sadguru Vandanam. Nityanandam Paramasugadam Kevalam Jnanamurtim Tandvatitam Gaganasadrisham Tattvamasyaadilaksham Ekam Nityam Vimalamachalam Sarvadi Sakshibhutam Bhavatitam Trigunarahitam Sadgurum Tam Namami. Awesome.
Beautiful. Thank you. So this evening's Vakyartha Sadhas is on the 25 faces of Paramashiva. Swamiji's been revealing to us the past few satsangs that the 5 actions or faces of Paramashiva are Srishti, manifestation, Sthiti, sustenance, Samhara, which is rejuvenation, Prabhava, pulling out of delusion, and Anugraha, liberation. And within each one of these faces, there are all of these faces represented as a phase. So within manifestation, there's also manifestation, sustenance, rejuvenation, pulling out of delusion, and liberation. And so naturally, the more and more you pile on these faces and phases, it really starts to, for me, build up in the brain, and it kind of overwhelms the logical mind. And so that's exactly what we're here to do, is to internalize, meditate upon, and discuss and share our experiences of what this means and what our understandings are of these 25 faces of Paramashiva. Yanatmananda, would you maybe like to lead us in with what your understanding is of the 25 faces, or one experiential understanding that has kind of clicked within you?
Yeah, for me, it's just it's the same thing, Drita, that you mentioned, that there's that Paramashiva manifests these 5 happenings, and each of those 5 happenings also involves the 5 faces, and that manifests as 25 dimensions. more than that is the same thing. I would just kind of ask the question, what is the significance of Paramashiva having 25 faces?
One interesting thing that I sort of cognized when Swamiji was explaining how each of the 5 faces of Paramashiva had 5 faces in and of itself, leading to a total of 25 faces, akin to the 25 heads of Paramashiva that's depicted, is that he said each one of these faces and phases are happening in our lives simultaneously and spontaneously at the same time. So the way I cognize it when he asked us to meditate upon these faces was to maybe look in and see at what point are we able to recognize when each of these faces are active, or to see which of these faces are active at given points in our lives. And for me, there's certain faces that are easier to recognize in my life than other faces. And I think Ashutosh, had mentioned this before the live happening of this stream. We were talking about this a little bit, where for me, it's easy to see how Srishti was the first face, right? The creation. To understand what Srishti is, and to see the creation of creation, the Srishti of the Srishti, the first face of Srishti, how that is a reality in terms of, well, if we want to start there, the creation of creation. So in my life, I feel like that immediate creation is like the spark or an idea, the inspiration I have to do something. I feel like that's a manifestation of Srishti in my life. And then once I start to act on that inspiration or that idea, then it transforms into that face of sustenance, of like moving forward and coming into reality. Like that, I can sort of walk my way up until a certain point. And what I think James and I were having this conversation after the satsang, it got like where I have difficulty understanding or like trying to connect the dots is when we get to the delusion. And delusion, the face of delusion, that is creation. So the Srishti of delusion. So I don't know. I may be jumping a little bit all over the place here, but that's just kind of how it's mapped off in my head. And I don't know if you guys have anything to say on how you guys relate to it or whatever.
Well, for me today, one thing that came out of the ordinary was just that when Swamiji was talking about Trobhava, delusion, he mapped it as pulling out of delusion. It's the first time that it actually struck me the way it struck me. I used to feel like it's like creating delusion, but he said it's pulling out of delusion. And then Anugraha was liberation. So that's something that stepped out of what I normally listen. And I'm not sure what it, yeah.
No, yeah, I mean, I definitely agree. I feel like that's a definition that is kind of new as well, because I think all of our understandings at some point was that it was putting into delusion, but he described it as pulling out of delusion. And so it's to say, if Trobhava is coming out of delusion, then is going into delusion a facet of Paramashiva? Like, or is that our own? That's to say something is separate.
That's where I get also my kind of stopped, is that if pulling out of delusion is the fourth head, then how is delusion generated in the first place? And is it possible that I create, like, how can I create delusion? How can I create something that is not from Paramashiva? Because Paramashiva is all pervading and he's within everything. So then, yeah, that's where my cognition kind of stops, and the dots are no longer like it no longer fits my understanding.
I see what you're saying, and that's also like something that came to mind as I was speaking was, yeah, how can if delusion is separate from Paramashiva, how can it even exist? But then there's another thing that came up as you were speaking was we're already Paramashiva, right? That's a cognition Swamiji had given us. We're just trying to understand and realize our Paramashivatva. So the process of coming out of delusion is that akin to aligning? Okay, before I could go there, remember how Swamiji says that there is the Paramashiva and then what we understand as ourselves. And Swamiji says that the universe, Paramashiva, there's no obligation for the universe to make sense to us, rather than us aligning to the universe, as to say, us to make sense to the universe. So that aligning process, would that be akin to throbhava, meaning moving away from delusion? Because the more you align with integrity to anything, the more you align with integrity, you're moving away from delusion. In the same way, you're moving closer to the Paramashivatva space. I'm kind of seeing those. There's a parallel there. I don't know. What do you guys think?
One thing you mentioned by saying, oh, yes, James, go ahead.
I'm sorry. Yes. So, one thing to give context first, I've had this conversation many times with Paramashiva. We like to talk about this topic because it's really for me. One thing that I always like to bring up when we're doing Vakyartha Sadhas, Paramashiva and is I always like to bring up the Akashic readings on death, something that was done in 2010, I believe, because really from listening to the Akashic reading on death and then listening to the satsangs now about these 5 faces added so much like interesting depth that I found really gave me some more understanding. What Paramashiva mentioned before was trying to wrap around how is it either are we putting ourselves in delusion, or are we just pulling ourselves out? What I do remember was I think what helps me understand it is in the first part of the 6-part series of the Akashic readings on death, Kalabhairava mentions that we have certain desires that we project out into the reality when we try to manifest our reality. But when we do that, there's this space when we visualize these projections of our desires that we tend to believe that what we want to desire based on what we have, what we don't have, or whatever we think are existing, that the reality that we're living in right now is either false or it exists permanently. And Kalabhairava mentions that you tend to go through these extremes of thinking that you are in either a heaven or a hell, a psychological heaven or in hell, that you are in either extreme. And so we tend to project our desires, we try to manifest our realities sometimes out of this visualization, forgetting that this happens, that our reality is neither completely true or completely false, nor non-existent. And so if I can add to that, what really made me understand this, I have some experiential understanding about this whole delusion thing. How I see the 5 faces is when let's say I have a certain thing I want to manifest, something in my reality I want to manifest. Swamiji said that, you know, this cognition, understanding, meditating on the 5 faces of Paramashiva will really just delete and melt down all negativities. So how I see that happening is, you know, if let's say we make a decision to have something manifest, of course, because there's that creation aspect and there's a sustenance aspect of that, we're supported. Same way, there are some obstacles that get in the way. There are things that get in the way. It's real, and that powerlessness happens there for a brief moment. No, and those obstacles exist for us to really figure out not really what is the obstacle that's getting in the way of me manifesting, but more deeply, what is the negative cognition, the powerless cognition that I have to renounce, that's not letting me see what it is, that's not allowing me to manifest. And so then that's the pulling out of delusion part. And from my own experience, there was a time where I felt so strongly that I wanted to manifest a certain reality. And so going through this process, there were obstacles, but it turns out that it wasn't the fact that I needed to manifest this reality. It was that I needed to find out that my intentions behind why I wanted to manifest this reality was something that I needed to get rid of. And when I pulled out of that delusion, I completely relaxed into it, and my desire melted. I didn't need it anymore. I didn't need to experience it anymore, because it wasn't necessarily something that was beneficial to me. It turns out that I was projecting this desire out of my delusion that you know, something came out of a permanent negative space out of my reality. Not sure if you got that, but you know, I do think that it's more of like we pull ourselves out of delusion. We will manifest. We'll tell ourselves to manifest a certain thing, and that's Paramashiva working on us, putting in that desire in us to try to manifest something, so that we can set the reality, the space for us to see where we're being deluded, where we have these powerless cognitions that are not letting us connect back to the space of Shuddha Advaitam. So I hope that I think I got more clarity about myself in the situation about that. So yes.
And one like cognition that came to me as you were speaking about that was the one face you didn't mention was the face of rejuvenation or death and rejuvenation. So your goal, or a goal, it doesn't matter what goal we may carry, sometimes our relationship to that goal even changes, so much so that it rejuvenates into something else, into where we actually need to be going, or more so like into a higher octave, into a more powerful cognition in relation to what we see ourselves and where we want to go and where we need to go ultimately. So I'm sure a lot of us have been experiencing life in certain ways where we see the A, B to C, but sometimes we walk on that path to A, B, and C, and it goes from A, B, C to Z, you know, where we actually need to go, but we didn't see the logic on how to get there, you know. But that in and of itself is it shows the innate intelligence of Paramashiva, you know. That's the guiding higher force, that rejuvenation aspects rejuvenates our relationship to ourselves and our cognitions. And then in the process, we become liberated, because a lot of the times we have certain delusionary aspirations, I find, and I am speaking for myself here, where we think we want one thing, or we thinking we want a thing for a particular reason, and then in the process of achieving that thing, we see the futility in it, we see the ephemerality, etheric nature of it, and then thereby becoming liberated from that desire in the process of actually achieving it. So I feel like that's an example, a real life example.
So Paramashiva accidentally disconnected his battery on the laptop, just died, so he'll be reconnecting in just a moment.
Okay, so with that, I'll just take a moment to reset our discussion for today's Vakyartha Sadhas. If you're just joining us today, we're talking about or internalizing the 25 faces of Paramashiva. The 25 faces, which are the core of these faces, are Srishti, manifestation. They are Sthiti, sustenance. Samhara, rejuvenation. Throbhava, pulling out of delusion. And Anugraha, which is liberation. And each one of these faces has its own 5 phases within them. And if you've just tuned in, spend 10 minutes with us internalizing this, contemplate these truths along with us. And I just want to bring up Ma Niddidhyasana. She has a very good addition, I think, that we can also add to this. And that is that Swamiji has said that these 5 are not 20% each. That delusion and liberation are much larger components than the 3 others. So when we're talking about, for instance, anything coming to, I mean, the human experience, for instance, it does not mean that, the manifestation of it, the sustenance, the rejuvenation, like the whole component is not equal. At some point, delusion and liberation are much larger. And I think we can all maybe grasp this. I mean, personally, the way I understand that is the human experience. How many births have we taken? We've taken hundreds, maybe thousands of human births. We've been living in delusion for quite a long time. And so although we've manifested as human beings and we're living and we're able to sustain and experience life as this human being, we've been put into delusion for how many thousands of years, how many births. And so this was a really good addition. I thought, thank you for that statement, Ma Divyananda. How are you grasping this, either one of you? For me, right away, the way that I visualized it was all of the births that we take. We've been in delusion a very long time. Liberation is taking how long for how many beings on the planet? There are, you look at 7 billion people on the planet, and there are only how many that have actually, achieved liberation. So the fact that liberation and delusion are much larger, I think it's just evident in the very state that humanity is in. But as Swamiji's doing, he's building this enlightenment ecosystem, which is going to help with that. But is there any visualizations or clicks that arise in anybody else after what Ma Divyananda had mentioned?
The only thing that I had remembered was Swamiji had mentioned that the 5 heads were independent intelligence. They were not limited by each other. Yeah.
I think this ties in with the vertical time zones, where Swamiji was sharing the higher you go, the closer you go to Kailasha, how the percentage of consciousness and intelligence is so much greater than the portion of mind and matter. And I think that the closer you get to higher vertical zones, the more liberation gets, the percentage of liberation and pulling out of delusion increases, and the creation, sustenance, and this rejuvenation perhaps happen much faster, because he did say that in subtle planes everything responds faster, right? So maybe the weight of creation, sustenance, and rejuvenation is drastically reduced as you increase in consciousness and you experience the higher planes or time zones. And then at these moments, then Paramashiva's pulling out of delusion and liberation phases are much more active. And then in lower, where in the lower time zones, then it might, creation, sustenance, and rejuvenation would be much more heavier.
I would like to say, it really that deepens my gratitude to know that of course, like Madhyavananda has mentioned, we've taken thousands of births, and who knows how long it would have taken for us to reach the level of understanding that we have about having that experiential experience. It's the reason why we have an avatar. The Swamiji's here really for us to have that experience all at once. He's here to really dissolve the karmas of hundreds of thousands of years, and we happen to be in this birth, in this body right now, and we're experiencing that. And the whole purpose of the avatar is really to, do that. It's one aspect of it is ultimately for our enlightenment and to get it fast, because we've been wanting it. We've been wanting to manifest an avatar. We manifested Swamiji same way he manifested us, and it's just healing hundreds and thousands of lives of karmas. So it's beautiful to have it, and it's something that can't be missed. It's something so special, and that's what I have to say about it.
Apologize, guys. The battery on my laptop went out. Would you guys give me a little quick brief on what we're talking about?
Fine.
Well,
You're fine.
My understanding was about, though we've basically continued on the same kind of topic, Parameshji and James was mentioning, even Drita mentioned with the from Madhyavananda. Just in relation to the the happening of Paramashiva as Trobhava and pulling out of delusion, so that there is a certain process we've been talking about that somehow makes, whether it's an intention we have, an experience we have, or desire we have, that there is some kind of a change that happens that like, even not to use the term too lightly, but kind of liberates us from that, and then we experience our existence and our context in a completely different way, and then we're mentioning about this that very fact, or those happenings of being pulled out of delusion and liberation, seeming as kind of a more kind of pertinent component to humanity. And so the only question from that context I would have is the happening of Trobhava, or pulling out of the experience of being pulled out of delusion. How does that relate in the sense to the happenings of the 5 happenings of Paramashiva and the 25 faces, like in terms of what is the benefit in knowing about it, or meditating on it, or having it be part of your life?
Okay. I see that it's a really interesting point, especially now that we're really focusing on the Trobhava aspect. The first 3 aspects, I feel like an individual can grasp and can understand and actually follow. But when the experience of Throbaba happens in our lives, whether that be day to day, or whether that be with the introduction of Guru into our lives, Throbaba seems to be a phase that generates a certain level of discomfort or unease, I would say, in life, because our delusions and illusions, it's understandable to say that those things that we've become comfortable with, those things are actually conclusions that are not the truth, but that we tend to think are the truth. And so the process of breaking those solidified conclusions that we have in ourselves, in our psyches, and the way we relate to the world, the process of those things breaking needs to happen in order for us to become liberated from them and actually see the reality as it is. But that breaking in and of itself is an uncomfortable process, because what is it? That's the Guru questioning our conclusions. That's life questioning our conclusions about it. And so when we're going through that experience, we have to have a certain patience with ourselves, first of all, and second, that's second of all. First of all, we have to have a willingness to go through that. And that's, I really feel that's why it's so difficult to be around a guru or amongst a guru, or for spiritual growth in general, because you have to be willing to say, yes, I'm not 100% right. I know that I'm not 100% right, but I want to see the reality as it is. And once you come to that understanding, your willingness to go through the Throbhava, to go to walk with Paramashiva as he removes that delusion from you, is what you need to experience the Ishana phase, the liberation phase. If you don't have that willingness, first of all, if you don't have the understanding that your conclusions are not 100% right, otherwise you would be experiencing Paramashivatva. If you have that understanding, second of all, if you don't have the willingness to go through the Throbhava, then you're stuck inevitably in some stage of arrogance with the reality. And that arrogance manifests itself in so many different ways. And ultimately, if Guru is the one showing you where your misses are, where your blind spots are, where your misguided conclusions are, then naturally that will turn towards abuse and resentment towards Guru, Sangha, and Linga. And I think it really requires a depth of maturity to understand that, well, even though my conclusions are not correct now, I know this is the path that's going to lead me to liberation, to the proper conclusions sometime in the future. And I feel like me in my personal life, I've applied Swamiji's teachings to various aspects of my life, and I've seen the liberation that's happened in me through various different aspects of my own life. And based on those successes that I've had, it gives me the courage and confidence to continue on the path with Swamiji, with Guru, with Sangha, with Linga, to get to where I need to go. I might not know 100% what it looks like, where my end goal is, what the conclusion is, what Paramashivatva is as an experience, but I have an innate understanding that I'm moving in the right direction based on my prior application of Swamiji's teachings on my life. So this is how I'm relating. This is how in my life I'm piecing together. I'm also assimilating the face of Throbhava. Like I'm not in the space of wanting to deny Throbhava or try to avoid Throbhava, because you can't. You have to. You can't avoid it. Meaning, trying to avoid it is a certain level of immaturity that we need to grow past. We need to assimilate it so that we can move past it into the face of liberation in whatever aspect of life we're talking about.
Throbhava, pulling out of delusion. Paramashiva is real. Delusion is not real. That's why it's delusion. So Paramashiva did not create delusion, because delusion is actually, it's non-existent. And that is why it's delusion. We feel it exists, we feel we created it, but it's not existent. Because if Paramashiva is pulling out of delusion,
Yeah,
I'm starting to feel this. I'm starting to feel this whole delusion thing is.
I have a doubt with this.
May I say something? I think right here, where with what Paramashiva was saying, how it makes sense with me, it's sort of it's explaining what I was trying to refer to from the Akashic readings on death, where Kalabhara was talking about how based on our ability to project our desires out into the existential space, we tend to think that our reality is permanent, like it's existing. If I have the exact I'm not going to paraphrase, but I think that this is probably, it's going to help give understanding to what Ashutosha is saying. Maybe it'll help with the direction of how this Vakyartha Sadhas is going.
I just want to say one thing, and maybe I'm on a different track. But if we're referring to the same Akashic reading satsang, I think in that portion of the Akashic readings, Kalabhara was referring to the process of clutching and unclutching, and I think he was talking about not life as in a real or unreal, reality as in real or unreal. I think the polarities were 100% positive and heavenly, and 100% negative and more like hell. He was saying that life is neither 100% heaven or 100% hell. So another word for that is 100% good or 100% bad, and that there is a middle ground, the reality, which is neither good nor bad, which is beyond the perception, beyond the label good or bad, pleasant or unpleasant.
Right.
Is that kind of where you?
Yeah. So that's where, yes. So thank you for saying that, because it's putting what I wanted to say before was yes, we don't create the delusion. We believe that the delusion is there. We for a moment, thought by thought, we project this into the reality, thinking that it's real, but it's not completely real. It's not completely false. So what is it that exists? There's something that needs to be completed. There's some sort of cognition. So with that said, I have this word by word transcript from the Akashic readings. It says, let me just, right here. The concepts of heaven and extended life where the desires are fulfilled, where the continuum of the desires exists, is extended delusion of desire-based individual identity setup. This is neither completely false nor permanent existence. Based on the ability to project their desires into the existential space, they create their own heaven. As long as they are disillusioned, they continue to project their heaven and live. When they are disillusioned by their own projection, then they get back to their original source and decide the next course of their action based on the imaginations and delusions they retained after the disillusionment. Every disillusionment boils down the extended imaginations to the root delusion. If the root delusion themselves are boiled, burnt away, the imagination completely goes away. You are liberated from the imagination. One more paragraph here. If the root delusions are not burnt or boiled, you project your root delusions into a different level of imagination, usually the desire imagination expansion. When it is delusioned, boils down to the root imagination, it projects again itself in the next root of guilt. The expansion, the imaginary projection of the guilt is only considered as the lower levels of hell. Again, neither the hell is completely truth, nor the heaven is completely truth. And same way, neither of them is completely false, nor of them is complete reality. So with that, those two paragraphs, what I'm drawing out from what Ashutoshānanda and Paramashiva were saying, we're neither creating the delusion. We believe that we project this idea of our existential that for that moment we manifest this thinking that our heavens and hells are completely true or completely false. We're going through the extremes of joy, intense joy, bliss, ecstasy, and then perhaps later we go through intense suffering, pain, and we try to we're constantly switching back and forth. And it's even mentioned later on in the readings that when you're going through the extremes, it's not trying to stick to one extreme. It's having to experience both so that you can go through the disillusionment, the liberation, and the rejuvenation process. And so I think that, yes, the delusion is not real, but the only thing that is the realness out of it, or why it's there in the first place, is for the purpose of liberating the disillusionment process that matters. It's what is the truth, rather, if we could use that word. What is the truth? What is truth versus what is real? So, this is part of the death process. If we can, we relate that to the recent satsangs that Swamiji is saying. And what Paramashiva was also, listening to both of you, it sounds like this is I remember Swamiji saying in the recent satsangs, zooming out. He gave us this initiation into zooming out to just seeing things for what they are. When we acknowledge that Tatpurusha, that delusion is part of these five faces, acknowledging it puts me into this intense responsibility, but passiveness. It puts me into a passiveness to understand that my desires, so part of it is there's some delusion, and there's every aspect is me coming out of the delusion. So it makes me trust so much more, because I'm neither clutched holding on based on my fear and greed to have something, to manifest something so much. I unclutch from it, and I realize that some part of it is not allowing me to connect back to the source and experience pure bliss. So understanding, I think Paramashiva had something to say.
Yeah, no, I think what I'm taking away that I think is really helpful to myself and to our viewers is when you described how we as individuals tend to project our heavens and tend to project our hells, and that process of disillusionment, meaning moving away from the illusion of heaven and the delusion of hell back to the reality. That process is throbhava, the moving away from delusion. I feel like the way you described it really helps us to look in and qualify the quality of that face of Paramashiva, because that face moves us from our I guess you can describe it as our manic instances when we feel like, oh my gosh, life is heaven, life is heavenly, life is all this great. When we're in that high sort of mania that we think that, okay, life, that heavenly projection, that's not reality. The Throbhava phase helps us move, realigns us back to the reality the core nature of what is. And the same way, when we think life is all hell and suffering and just negativity, in the same way, the Throbhava phase helps us to realign us to the baseline reality of just what is. And I feel like you sharing that really helped me to see that Throbhava works in both ways, and our delusions and our illusions don't come in just one shape or flavor. You know, it's really dependent on an individual to individual basis. I'm sure we all have our own individual delusions and illusions, and Throbhava is all helping us realign ourselves to the nature that is.
So if Throbhava is bringing us out of the extreme in which we decided to project ourselves, then what is the liberation? Isn't pulling out of delusion the liberation?
So
or it's just bringing us to the space where liberation can happen.
Yeah, see, that's an interesting point, because the same way that we can describe, and this is what another thing we're talking about, say we're in delusion here, and then the process of moving out of that delusion is Throbhava, and that end point, if you want to call it that, is liberation, and then it continues on.
I was seeing it as the center is the reality. We project ourselves towards heaven or hell. Then the Throbhava is the process of coming back to the reality, to beyond the ups and downs. But once we enter into that space of beyond the ups and downs, then liberation kicks in. But then what is liberation? Isn't going beyond the ups and downs liberation itself? Or is it something else?
I feel like yes, but the process of moving from either extreme is the Throbhava phase. But the moment you reach that middle ground, you're in that liberation phase. So this is another example of how you can't. Swamiji says they're all happening simultaneously. How you can't take one away from the other. Like they all go in tandem. I feel like Ishana and Throbhava are just different. We're putting different names on the different phases or experiences, but in and of themselves, ultimately, it is one process, one Paramashiva, right?
So once you reach the center, the liberation Ishana gets created. The creation of Ishana happens. It gets sustained, and then it gets rejuvenated. So when does liberation stop?
Well, liberation, I feel it does.
Why would liberation need to go through samhara, which is the rejuvenation?
Yes, this is a really good question. I'm not able to. We were talking about this earlier. You have something to say, James?
Yeah, so I have something to say. So going back to the paragraph again, I think it adds something in response to what Ashitoshananda said just a moments ago. Going back to the paragraph, it says, as long as they are disillusioned, they continue to project their heaven and hell. Heaven and live. When they are disillusioned by their own projection, then they get back to their original source and decide the next course of their action based on they retained after the thing that in response. Every delusion.
Can you repeat the end? Your internet jumped. Can you repeat the end?
We're coming up to 10 minutes left, so if you can close this within a minute or so.
So when they are disillusioned by their own projection, then they get back to their original source and decide the next course of their action based on the imaginations and delusions they retained after the disillusionment. Every disillusionment boils down the extended imaginations to the root delusion. If the root delusions themselves are boiled, burnt away, the imagination completely goes away. You are liberated from the imagination. So I think that us constantly going through these extended imaginations, it says, Kalabhaiva says that it's to boil down, chip away at the root delusion. It's going back constantly to it, to boil it and becoming liberated from it. So understanding this, it just puts me into a big I guess yes, or trust.
I have one thing that came to mind, and that's really
One second, Paramasti. So we have 10 minutes left. So based off of everything that's happened so far in the Vakyartha Sadhas, each one of us can take 90 seconds to 2 minutes to just talk about one powerful cognition that you're taking away from everything that we've discussed so far. So maybe James, we can continue with you, and then we'll go to Paramasti. So you guys can lead through in 90 seconds to 2 minutes.
Sure. So, understanding this with what everybody has said so far, what I'm taking away is that I have a lot of trust in what the cosmos has, because really I'm starting to see that yes, there's an aspect of what I want, what I think I want, in order for me to create the space for me to come out of some sort of delusion, for me to pull myself out, for me to boil down at my root delusions, my root patterns, and that it's all the real process is the truth. The reason why we have our desires in the first place is because we've taken new bodies, we continue to project these desires, and it puts me into a space of constant trust, and trust that whatever I want to manifest, whatever I'm living now, is for this purpose, and whatever Swamiji wants me to manifest is for this purpose. Swamiji said, everything that we're talking about now, it's sort of it reminds us that this is the effects of time, us constantly clutching on and believing for a moment that our hells or heavens are real and permanent, and then really unclutching from that, as Swamiji said, understanding these cognitions of the time, it's going to liberate this from us. When we realize that time is our friend, is our best friend, not our enemy, we literally become Kalabhairava, is what was said in these Akashic records. And as Swamiji said, extreme authenticity manifests Kalabhairava. When we're no longer choosing to experience the effects of time, when we're so authentic to Kalabhairava, we experience this Niddidhyasana. So that's what I would have to say, I guess, is what I got out from all of this.
And my powerful cognition that I took away from this whole thing plays on the authenticity part of where you just left off, James. I think after this conversation, we have come and we've really clearly shown how this process of Throbhava is happening in each and every situation of our lives, how we can identify the Throbhava happening, right? Moving away from delusion back to the reality. And where does authenticity come into this is we all have Throbhava happening in us at any given point, simultaneously and spontaneously. So we should have the authenticity to let that process happen. We should have the authenticity within in and of ourselves to understand that yes, at some point in our experience, we don't know, or we're in some level of delusion, and we need to move away from that level of delusion back to the reality, back to the Paramashiva space. And I feel like this is a really especially with the current climate of Sangha affairs and happenings, we really need to identify that our own authenticity in our relationship to Throbhava, because if we allow for Throbhava to happen, if we allow for the process of moving towards realization to happen without arrogance in our space, then we'll make so much progress But if we tend to cherish arrogance within within ourselves to kind of assume our conclusions are right, based on an emotional ups and downs, or ideas of what we think is right or wrong, then we tend to miss the fruit of we tend to miss the full ripening of that fruit, that liberation to happen. And I think that requires a tremendous amount of authenticity within ourselves to say, yes, we don't know at this point, but we're moving on the path to knowing. And I'm going to wait, I'm going to stick it out, I'm going to apply the teachings and see where they lead, and see how that liberation continues to happen in ourselves. And I feel like if we stick to that, if we remain integrated to that very innocent and down to earth approach to spirituality, then we'll make progress. Yeah. So that's what I have to say.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, my powerful cognition is similar to what Paramashiva is saying. Just simply what I'm understanding is that I need to be in integrity. And I need to find out what integrity means. I need to find out what integrity is, and I need to find out how to make that my life.
Powerful cognition I'm getting from this is seeing the intensity and the complexity of this spontaneous, simultaneous happening. The only way for me to remain integrated is to surrender to that moment. And as I surrender and allow this happening to happen, then I allow Paramashiva and Swamiji to flow. And that puts me in the space where I can see the whole thing unfolding. Me thinking that I have to see where it is going to unfold before moving towards that is delusion. Me realizing that the whole thing is happening simultaneously and spontaneously, I decide to surrender to that and allow that to flow and let the understanding unfold as Paramashiva is manifesting.
I would say my powerful cognition that I'm taking away from this is I was really stuck on manifesting, and why, is it a delusion? Is it a choice to be in delusion if we choose to manifest? And one thing that Swamiji said in this past satsang that helped me clearly understand this, and then based off of what was said this evening within this Vakyartha Sadhas, Swamiji is saying that running due to money, lust, fear, or greed is like you're caught in Maya, you're caught in stupidity in a sense. So, but that is an act of manifestation when you're wanting to manifest money or whatever the motivation is, you're manifesting. But if you're choosing to live for Paramashiva, with Paramashiva's energy to manifest through you, then I feel like manifestation is very much a part of all the other five faces. But for me, if it's not, if manifestation, if the basis of it isn't Paramashiva, then you're going towards delusion. And so my powerful cognition based off of everything that was saying is that manifestation is good when it's source, when we're aligning and integrating to Guru, to Paramashiva, and using that integrity to manifest more life and to enrich others more. And so with that, thank you everybody for sharing your powerful cognitions, for being a part of this Vakyartha Sadhas. If you're been a part of this and you're in the comment section, maybe you could let us know what your powerful cognition is that you've taken away from this session as well. And thank you very much for taking part in this session. We will be here basically every evening. We've been going quite steadily thus far. And with that being said, thank you to Srinitya Ashutoshananda, Yanatmananda, Srinitya Paramestiananda, James. I appreciate you all being here as always. And Paramestia, maybe you can close this session with the closing mantra for us all, since you opened it with our prayer as well.
Yes, great. So we'll conclude with the Purna mantra. Om Purnamatav Purnamitam Purnat Purnamudachyate Purnasya Purnamadaya Purnamevavashishyate. Om Shanti Shanti Shanti. Harihi Om Tat Sat Sarvam Bhagavat Shri Nityananda Paramashiva Paduka Padamastu. Om Nityanandam. Yeah,
Beautiful.
thank you guys for having us on. I really enjoyed this session, and I really hope to join you guys for future sessions. And let's make this a thing, guys. Yeah, let's do it.
Absolutely. Thank you very much for being here. Thank you to everybody else for being here. I'm going to close this out so we can close within an hour. Nityanandam, everybody, have a great evening.
Addendum.